Welcome back. We're talking about Rwanda 25 years after the genocide. Let's bring in our panel. Jacqueline Murekatete joins us from New York. She's the founder and president of the Genocide Survivors Foundation. And joining us from New Haven, Connecticut, David Simon is director of the Genocide Studies program at Yale University. Welcome to both of you to the show. Jacqueline, let me start with you. You are a survivor of the genocide, of that tragedy 25 years ago. You were 9 years old at the time. You lost all of your immediate family. Looking at this 25 years later, what do you remember of those 100 days of terror, those fateful days in Rwanda?
I remember everything, and that's the case with all survivors. I mean, for the world, it's been 25 years, but for those of us who lived through those 100 days of genocide, the horrors that we witnessed are still very vivid in our minds, and the loss that we experienced is still an indelible part of our life, something that we've been living with for the past 25 years. So the memories are very vivid.
And how do you cope with that?
It's a journey. It's a journey, not just for me, but for all survivors. I mean, I was very fortunate in that after the genocide, I was able to leave Rwanda. I had an uncle who lived in the United States, and he adopted me and brought me here. So I was raised here. I had opportunities to go to school. I had a community of friends and people who became mother figures and father figures. So having that support has certainly helped. But as I said, when you go through a genocide and survive a genocide and lose what we lost, as you said, I lost my entire family, my parents, all my 6 siblings, most of my extended family. That's a loss that remains with you for the rest of your life. So you cope because you have no other choice but to cope. I think that those of us who survive feel a responsibility to live, not just for ourselves, but for our families. So we are always working hard to move forward and to create a decent life, but it's a constant battle.
David Simon, you are a student of genocide. You study this. What did you make of the violence in Rwanda at that time? And was it in some respects predictable, given what we just heard from Paul Rusesabagina, who told us that there was a history of feuding between Hutus and Tutsis in the country?
Thank you. Absolutely. I think there were warning signs that were noticed by some, but unfortunately missed by those who mattered. It's important to remember that the United Nations did have a peacekeeping force in place in Rwanda in April 1994. And as Paul Rusesabagina pointed out, those peacekeepers were withdrawn rather than deployed to protect Rwandans. So the warning signs were there, but they weren't heeded.
And what do you think, David, led to, I mean, why was there so much hatred between these two groups?
It goes back to, I think, the understandings and misunderstandings of history that to pre-colonial Rwanda and in colonial Rwanda, there was a growing difference between the Hutu and Tutsi population, at least among elites on both sides. And by 1959, they saw each other as the elite Hutus and the elite Tutsis saw each other as political rivals to one another.
Jacqueline, let's listen to what the Rwandan President Paul Kagame said recently during commemorations of this 25th anniversary of the genocide. Let's watch this.
The only conclusion to draw from Rwanda's story is profound hope for our world. No community is beyond repair, and the dignity of the people is never fully extinguished. 25 years later, here we are, all of us, wounded and heartbroken, yes, but unvanquished.
So, Jacqueline, we hear President Paul Kagame there talk about the fact that Rwandans are still wounded, they're still heartbroken, but he also talks of profound hope. And we just heard Paul talk to us about two Rwandas, one that's presented to the world, one which tells the world that this is a stable country, that it's made a great recovery, etc., and another Rwanda which is still a dangerous place for people. What do you make of that?
I mean, I think that anybody who has visited Rwanda, and I encourage everybody who's listening to this program to consider visiting, you can see for yourself what Rwanda is. And Rwanda today is one of the safest countries on the continent. It's a model for not only on the African continent, but for the world, because as President Kagame said, in 1994, we have to realize not only was over 1 million people murdered, but the country itself physically was in ashes. It had been destroyed. So to go back to Rwanda now, 25 years later, and see the progress that has taken place, economically, socially, politically, I mean, the progress is undeniable. And so instead of, saying there are two different Rwanda, there's only one Rwanda that I know. And again, I encourage everybody who want to learn about Rwanda to go and see for themselves. But the progress that has been made over the past 25 years is undeniable. Of course, there are challenges, and people have to understand that just as a genocide did not happen overnight, as you mentioned, Hutus did not get up one day and want to kill their Tutsi neighbors. The genocide arose from many years of state-sanctioned discrimination, of a culture of impunity, of a dehumanization campaign which portrayed Tutsis as foreigners, as cockroaches that needed to be exterminated. So the indoctrination, the type of indoctrination that led to the genocide existed decades before the genocide. So people have to realize that you cannot expect a country to be a perfect country 25 years later. Just as the indoctrination that led to the genocide took years, progress and peace is something that we have to constantly work for. But what has been achieved over the past 25 years is certainly, again, undeniable.
Right.
Anybody who visits Rwanda, who has been to Rwanda, will tell you that.
Right, and looking at what has been achieved, at that progress, Rwanda is now the first country with a female majority in parliament. Just over 60% of those in parliament are now women. How significant is that in that country?
I think it's very significant. I mean, I think a part of it happened because there was really no other choice. A lot of men, as you know, were murdered in the genocide, women too, and children. Of course, everybody was a target because of their ethnicity, their Tutsi ethnicity. But I think that having a high percentage of women in post-genocide Rwanda, the government really recognized that they will have to use women in every aspect of the Rwandan society, especially in the positions of leadership. And a lot of people believe that when you put women in power, when you put women in positions of leadership, then you are creating a better environment for peace. So I think it's certainly one of the incredible achievements that Rwanda has enjoyed over the past 25 years, and it's something that is also looked at as a model for other countries.
Right, David Simon, of course, Rwanda continues its search for peace, for reconciliation, for healing from what happened 25 years ago. President Paul Kagame has actually discouraged Rwandans from talking about the tragic events of 25 years ago as a means of healing those wounds. What do you make of that approach?
Well, I don't know that he's discouraged people from talking about it. It may be my perception may be an artifact of the fact that my visits to Rwanda are often around the commemoration time when the discussion of the genocide against the Tutsis is very much the sort of the topic of conversation. But I do see the broader point, which is that, in many ways, the change that Rwanda has undergone is a change to make it's a remarkable change to make the country, in some senses, unremarkable, to move beyond the stain of genocide and violence. The fact that there's a majority of women in parliament and in other leadership positions is remarkable in some sense, certainly comparatively and internationally, but unremarkable because it doesn't mean any major change in the way society works. It may be a better place for for girls to grow up, to see role models in power. But it doesn't substantially alter the way government works. And I think that could be expanded to other realms of society where for Rwanda to succeed is in some ways for Rwanda to be normal. President Kagame's has used a line on a few occasions saying, we were supposed to be a failed state. Yeah, and he's right that in 1994, given the destruction, the human destruction, the physical destruction in the country, it's very easy to imagine Rwanda in a very similar state to some of its neighbors right now. But in fact, the safety, the security, the signs of economic growth are impressive, and they're impressive because they can help people move beyond the idea of Rwanda as a place of genocide.
Jacqueline, what are your thoughts on that? Rwanda may not be there yet, but is the country well on its way to reconciliation?
Yeah, I think there have been a lot of progress made in the area of trying to bring the entire Rwandan population, Hutus, Tutsis, and Twas, in a place where they realize that they have to find a way to coexist and coexist peacefully. But I think it's important to recognize, as David said, and as I said earlier, that just as the ideology of genocide took years to implant and to grow and leading to the genocide, you know, that's not an ideology. The ideology of genocide is not something that you can eradicate overnight. So certainly, we still, once in a while, will hear of, you know, of Hutus who still teach their children that Tutsis are foreigners, that Tutsis are cockroaches. You hear incidences like that. You hear sometimes of teachers who are discovered teaching the so-called Hutu power ideology, which led to the genocide. So just as the genocide did not happen overnight, and the ideology of it took years to grow, eradicating it is going to take equally or even more time. But I do think that the fact that Rwanda is where it is now, as you said earlier, in aftermath of the genocide, Rwanda was considered a failed state. A hopeless state that had no future. And to see where it is now, you have to acknowledge the progress. And a lot of that has been, part of it has been that Hutus, Tutsis, and Twas have come together and recognized that if we're to prosper as a country, we have to have, yes, we are Hutus, Tutsis, and Twas, and that's not something that is discouraged, but we are also Rwandans, encouraging this larger identity of us being Rwandans. And I think that the new generation of Rwandans, as David said, for us who went through the genocide and for the generation that carried out the genocide, it's very difficult because in 1994, you have to realize that people were being killed by their neighbors. The people who killed my family were the people who used to come to the same church, draw water from the same nearby well. And so the trust between neighbors was destroyed, and that has to be repaired.
Okay, and that's where we have to leave it. Thanks to both of you for being with us. That's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for watching.